The whispers began in the candlelit corridors long before the truth reached Gladys's ears. A single sheet of paper, creased at the edges and inked in hurried strokes, carried words that could either destroy her standing or lift her above every rival in New York society. But this was no ordinary rumor. It was a leak from the next chapter of her life, one she hadn't even lived yet. And in the shadows of the ballroom, a figure watched. A man she least expected to be on her side, *the night air in Fifth Avenue, was cool enough to send a shiver through the thickest velvet, yet inside the Van Rhijn household, the heat of gossip was stifling. Servants passed trays of tea and cake, but their eyes were fixed not on the guests, but on the single folded paper that sat on the center table in Mrs. Astor's drawing room. No one admitted to placing it there, yet everyone wanted to know what. It said, Gladys stood at the edge of the room, pretending to be absorbed in conversation with a young debutante, though her attention kept drifting to that piece of paper. She didn't need to be told twice that in a house like this, secrets rarely stayed secrets for long. Soon enough, Mrs. Astor's thin fingers lifted the paper, and her sharp eyes scanned the page. A small, satisfied smirk appeared, interesting. She murmured, just loud enough for the entire room to hear. The effect was immediate. Murmurs erupted, fans snapped open, and glances darted toward Gladys. The debutante beside her leaned in. It's about you, she whispered, eyes alight with curiosity and dread. Gladys's pulse quickened. She had no idea what had been written, but she could tell from the sudden hush that it wasn't an innocent note. She took a careful step forward, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Mrs. Astor, always aware of her audience, held the paper out as if it were a prize jewel. It appears, she said, her voice smooth as silk, that our dear Gladys may soon be at the center of quite a transformation. The room seemed to close in on her. Transformation. The word could mean anything in this world. Marriage, scandal, financial ruin. Gladys's mind raced through every recent conversation, every private word she had spoken that could have been overheard. She thought of her strict mother, her calculated suitors, the endless watchful eyes of high society. One guessed a man she barely knew let out a quiet laugh. It seems someone has been writing our story for us. That was when she understood. This was no ordinary gossip. This was a leak, an intentional glimpse into events that had yet to happen. Someone had written it down as though it were already fact. The audacity of it both terrified and intrigued her. The paper passed from hand to hand, but each time she tried to get closer, another body blocked her path. She caught fragments of phrases. Unexpected alliance, overturned the balance. The Duke. Her heart stopped at the last one. The Duke. That man had never shown her anything more than a polite nod in passing. Why would his name be in connection with hers? At last, the paper landed in her gloved hand. She didn't even glance around to see who had given it to her. Her eyes devoured the lines in front of her. And there it was, in black ink, Gladys will rise, not alone, but with the Duke at her side, bound by an agreement that will shock the city. Her fingers tightened around the paper. She could feel the weight of every stare in the room pressing down on her. The Duke's name was not to be tossed around lightly, and certainly not in the same breath as hers. If this was a lie, it could ruin her. If it was the truth, she didn't yet know if she was ready for it. She folded the paper quickly and tucked it into her reticule. No one stopped her, but the hum of speculation followed her out of the room like a shadow. The gas lamps outside flickered in the night breeze, and Gladys pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Somewhere in the city, the Duke would hear about this leak if he hadn't arranged it himself. The thought made her both wary and strangely hopeful. In a world where alliances were made in whispers and broken in the same breath, a powerful name beside hers could change everything. But at what cost? She would have to find out who had written this, and why. The answer she suspected would be just as dangerous as the rumor itself. And perhaps more tempting, the city had a way of talking to itself in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn. Carriages rattled down empty streets, their wheels striking cobblestone with a rhythm that seemed to carry secrets from one block to the next. Gladys sat upright in her bed, the folded paper still in her possession, hidden inside a book she doubted anyone in the household would bother to open. Sleep had not visited her. Instead, her mind replayed the words she had read over and over until they blurred. Asterisk the Duke at her side. Asterisk bound by an agreement that would shock the city. Asterisk she tried to recall every interaction they'd ever had, and it didn't take long because there had been so few. A greeting at a garden party last spring, a brief exchange about the weather outside the opera. The Duke was a man of quiet reserve, his expression carved from marble, his gaze steady and unreadable. Why would someone link his name to hers? And, more importantly, why in such a deliberate way? Asterisk by morning, the rumor had spread beyond Mrs. Astor's drawing room. A letter from her friend Agnes arrived over breakfast, carrying the same news in hurried handwriting. I heard from 3 separate sources that the Duke has taken a personal interest in you. Is this true? Do write back immediately. Details are scarce. Gladys folded the letter before her mother could read it, but the damage was already done. She could feel her mother's eyes narrowing, her mind calculating how best to use or suppress such talk. Asterisk later that afternoon, Gladys stepped into the park under the guise of taking the air. She knew better than to believe in chance encounters. Here, every stroll in the park was a stage performance, with benches as theater boxes and walking paths as aisles. It was no surprise to her when she spotted the Duke in the distance, standing near a wrought iron railing that overlooked the frozen lake. Asterisk her steps slowed. She had not planned on approaching him. If anything, she wanted to study him from afar, to see if his posture or his company betrayed any knowledge of the leak. But then he turned, as though sensing her gaze, and his eyes met hers across the cold expanse. Asterisk there was no smile, no bow, no exaggerated greeting, just a simple inclination of his head and a stillness that seemed to draw her closer despite herself. Asterisk Miss Gladys, he said when she finally stood within a few paces. His voice was low, each syllable deliberate. It appears we have found ourselves the subject of public imagination. Asterisk her breath caught, not because he'd confirmed hearing the rumor, but because he'd done so without any hint of surprise, as if he'd been expecting it. Asterisk you've heard. Then she said carefully, watching his expression for cracks. Asterisk I have. A faint glint touched his eyes, but whether it was amusement or calculation, she could not tell. The question is, do you wish to deny it? Asterisk it was a trap, of course. To deny too firmly would make her seem defensive. To confirm would make her seem reckless. So she chose the middle ground. I wish to understand it first. Asterisk the Duke's gaze lingered on her, and she felt as though he were weighing her worth, not in the shallow way society men did, but in a manner that suggested he was considering her as a player in a game. Asterisk then perhaps, he said, we should speak privately, away from the ears that hunger for scandal. Asterisk a shiver ran through her, not from the winter air, but from the quiet certainty in his tone. He was not denying the rumor. He was not outraged by it. If anything, he seemed to be inviting her into it. Asterisk before she could answer, a group of well-dressed ladies passed by, casting them both sidelong glances and whispered remarks. The Duke stepped aside, giving them the image of a polite parting, and murmured under his breath, tomorrow, at the conservatory, noon. Asterisk then, with a slight bow, he walked away, leaving Gladys standing alone under the pale winter sun, clutching the edges of her cloak. Asterisk it was then she understood something she hadn't dared to before. If the Duke was not the source of the leak, he was willing to play along as if he were. And that, in the world they lived in, was far more dangerous. Asterisk the Van Rhijn Conservatory was a place of quiet beauty in every season, but on that winter afternoon, it felt more like a hidden chapel. The glass panes let in pale light, soft as silk, spilling over the potted palms and winter roses that somehow still bloomed in the warmth of the greenhouse air. Gladys arrived precisely at noon, her gloved hands clasped tightly around a small fur muff, her breath slow and measured. She had told no one where she was going. Asterisk the Duke was already there. He stood beside a long table lined with orchids, his black coat stuck against the vivid green. He did not turn when she entered. He seemed instead to be studying one of the blossoms, as if its delicate shape required his full attention. Only when the door closed behind her did he glance up. Asterisk Miss Gladys, he greeted, his voice as calm as it had been in the park. Punctuality is a rare virtue. Asterisk she moved closer, the soft rustle of her skirts the only sound between them. You asked to meet privately. I assume you have something to say about this matter. Asterisk, he smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. The matter. Yes, a curious thing, isn't it? A rumor that names us both, yet no clear author to claim it. Asterisk you make it sound harmless, she replied, keeping her tone steady. It could ruin me. She moved closer, the soft rustle of her skirts the only sound between them. You asked to meet privately. I assume you have something to say about this matter. Asterisk, he smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. The matter. Yes, a curious thing, isn't it? A rumor that names us both, yet no clear author to claim it. Asterisk you make it sound harmless, she replied, keeping her tone steady. It could ruin me. Asterisk it could, he said, finally turning to face her fully. Or it could do the opposite. That depends entirely on how we choose to use it. Asterisk her heart thudded once, hard. Use it? Asterisk he gestured toward a bench in the corner, where the light fell in dappled patterns from the glass roof. Please, sit. Asterisk she obeyed, though every step felt like moving deeper into unfamiliar territory. When he sat opposite her, his posture was relaxed, but his gaze held an intensity that seemed to pin her in place. Asterisk I suspect, he began, that the one who started this rumor is neither your friend nor mine. It is bait, Miss Gladys bait, meant to draw us into a reaction that benefits someone else, a rival perhaps, or an enemy we do not yet know. Asterisk Gladys felt her pulse quicken. If that's true, then why would you not simply deny it outright? Why even meet with me like this? Asterisk, he leaned forward slightly. Because denial makes one appear defensive. And in society, the defensive party is always guilty in the public eye. Instead, we must control the narrative. We must decide what the city will believe. Asterisk the words were dangerous. Even more dangerous was the calm confidence with which he spoke them, as though such games were second nature to him. Asterisk, and you would do this with me? She asked quietly. Asterisk he gave a small nod. If we appear united, seen together in the right places, at the right moments, then the rumor ceases to be scandal. It becomes expectation, and when people expect something, they stop questioning it. Asterisk, she should have been alarmed. She should have stood and left. But instead, she found herself holding his gaze, caught between fear and fascination. In his proposal lay the possibility of social elevation she had never dared imagine, but also the certainty of entanglement with a man whose motives she did not fully trust. Asterisk and what, she asked carefully, would you gain from this arrangement? Asterisk the faintest flicker of a smile touched his lips. Allies are a rare commodity, Miss Gladys. Especially those who understand the value of secrecy. Asterisk for a moment, the conservatory was silent except for the faint hiss of the heating pipes. Outside the glass, snow began to fall in slow, deliberate flakes. Gladys realized she was leaning forward now, as if pulled by an invisible thread toward the man across from her. Asterisk, think about it, he said at last, rising to his feet. But do not take too long. Opportunities like this are like the orchids, beautiful but fragile. Asterisk he walked toward the door without waiting for her reply, his footsteps echoing softly on the tiled floor. When the door closed behind him, Gladys sat very still, surrounded by the warm air and the scent of flowers, her mind already spinning with what this alliance might cost and what it might yield. The following week, the Van Rhijn household buzzed with preparations for Mrs. Astor's winter charity gala. The event was the crown jewel of the season, a night where society's most influential paraded themselves under glittering chandeliers, their jewels catching the light like constellations. Gladys had attended before, always as a silent ornament at her mother's side, her worth measured in curt nods and the occasional polite inquiry from eligible bachelors. But this year, something had shifted. This year, she would not be invisible. Asterisk her. Mother inspected her gown before they left, a pale silk trimmed with ivory lace, understated but elegant. "You will speak to the right people," Mrs. Van Rhijn said, fastening a diamond brooch at Gladys's shoulder. "And you will not linger near anyone who might encourage further gossip." Asterisk Gladys gave a single nod, her expression calm. She said nothing of the Duke's plan. Some truths were better kept hidden until the right moment. Asterisk the ballroom glittered with candlelight and mirrors, the air alive with the rustle of satin and the scent of winter roses. Conversations overlapped, laughter rose and fell, and somewhere an orchestra wove a waltz that made the floor seem to sway underfoot. Gladys entered on her mother's arm, greeted by polite smiles, some genuine, others sharpened with curiosity. She could feel the weight of the rumor pressing in on her from every side. Asterisk then she saw him. Asterisk the Duke stood across the room, a dark figure framed by the soft glow of the chandeliers. His coat was perfectly tailored, his expression unreadable, but his gaze found hers instantly as though he had been waiting. He began to move toward her, weaving through the crowd with deliberate ease. Conversations faltered as people noticed. Heads turned. Asterisk when he reached her, he did not bow with the formal distance of their past encounters. Instead, he offered his arm. "Miss Gladys," he said, his voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear, "would you do me the honor of joining me for a dance?" Asterisk the request was a public one, impossible to refuse without making a scene. Her mother's hand twitched against her own arm, but Gladys stepped forward, slipping her hand into his. A small murmur rippled through the crowd, as tangible as a breeze. Asterisk the orchestra shifted seamlessly into the next waltz as they took their place on the dance floor. The Duke's hand was firm at her waist, guiding her with practiced precision. Around them, eyes followed every step, every turn. The air seemed charged, not just with the energy of the dance, but with the realization that the rumor was no longer just whispered. It was being written into reality before their very eyes. Asterisk, "You've made your choice." Then he murmured as they moved in time with the music. Asterisk, she met his gaze steadily. "For now," asterisk, he gave the faintest smile, one that didn't break the mask of control he wore so well. "Then let's make sure the city never forgets tonight." Asterisk when the dance ended, he didn't release her immediately. They stood together for a moment longer than was proper, allowing the eyes of the room to drink in the sight. By the time he escorted her back toward her mother, the expressions around them had shifted from idle curiosity to something closer to respect, even wariness. Asterisk, her mother's face was unreadable, but Gladys caught the quick, calculating glance she cast at the Duke. In that instant, Gladys understood the true power of the moment. This was no longer a rumor to be denied. It was a story that others would now tell for them, in tones of awe or envy, but always with her name linked to his. Asterisk as the night wore on, she could feel the change settling over her like a new gown fitted. Unfamiliar, but undeniably hers. The cost of this alliance was still unknown, but one truth had become clear. She was no longer merely navigating the currents of society. With the Duke at her side, she had begun to steer them. Asterisk and in the quiet between dances, as their paths crossed briefly once more, he leaned in and said just loud enough for her to hear, "This is only the beginning." Asterisk,